Well, good morning.
Good morning.
This is early for me. I'm in Orange County, so we had to get an early start. I want to thank Dennis for coming by in the dark and picking me up, and we drove up together. So great to see people here, getting coffee, hanging out. So I wanted to tell a little bit of a story to open and then tell you kind of how I ended up on this journey that kind of took my career down a personal path that I wasn't expecting. So I wanted to start by just a story from the trip. I don't know how many of you read my bio, but we'll talk a little bit about what I did last year. So it was September 2014, and I was riding a bicycle through Wisconsin. I was on my way across country. I last year rode a bike from San Diego to New York, and for a cause that I believe in. And so I talked to this guy at a bike shop, and he said, you know, there's great trails in Wisconsin. Do you know where you're at? And I thought, no, I don't know anything about Wisconsin. I'm just trying to get to New York. He said, there's this great trail system here, and there's all kinds of trails go any which way you want to go across the strait, you can get there on a trail. And so I had no idea, but sure enough, the trails were amazing. So the first day I got to ride with my kids on the Root River Trail. It was absolutely incredible. My kids were with me on this trip. They didn't do the whole ride. They just rode a couple miles here and there. And it was one of the most memorable days of the trip for me, is to spend an hour with my boys riding on what ended up being about a 100-mile day for me. But the second day, or the second trail, was this trail called the Sparta to Elroy Trail. And he told me this is the premier trail in Wisconsin. You have to figure out how to reroute your ride to go from Sparta to Elroy. So the trail from Sparta to Elroy is about a 30-mile trail, and it's on a closed kind of gravel trail system. And so you'd be riding along in the trees by myself, town to town, and we're talking small town America. I spent a lot of time alone on the road last year. And so I'd be riding along, and all of a sudden you'd come kind of poking through the trees, and there'd be these amazing views of these farms, and then you'd go back in the trees and you have no idea where you're at. And so he told me that the Sparta Elroy Trail has tunnels. It's an old rail system. So they had taken out the trains, and they call it rails to trails. They had basically taken out all the train tracks and converted these to bike trails. And again, hundreds of miles. I think they said there's 900 miles of trail systems in Wisconsin. Wow. And so I'm on this Sparta to Elroy Trail, and the feature of the Sparta to Elroy Trail is these old train tunnels. Now, he told me to take lights, and I had not planned on riding at night on my trip. And so I didn't have proper nighttime lights. I had kind of commuter lights. I had a good tail light, just more to be seen than see. And so I had these lights. So I'm riding along, and I got to mention a couple things about myself. I wouldn't say that I'm necessarily scared of the dark, but I definitely wouldn't be the first one to shoot down a staircase down to a dark basement. In fact, right now I have a couple office mates that are trying to convince me to go to some haunted house event, and I said, no, it's not really my thing. And so, again, not really scared of the dark, but definitely not super comfortable. The other thing is I'm fairly claustrophobic. If I sit in a row of, I always like to get the outside seat. If I sit in a restaurant, I want to face the restaurant. I mean, I have some weird things. I'm kind of weird that way. So I hadn't seen anybody for a couple hours. I've been riding by myself on this trail in the trees. Like I said, you'd see some farms. I wouldn't see anybody. And I come riding up to the first tunnel. And it is a mile long. And I'm thinking, no, it's not going to happen. This is not going to happen. And so I get off the bike and I'm standing there and I'm thinking there's no way. So I start figuring out there's got to be a different route. So the reroute would have cost me an extra 40 miles. I was already on a 100 and some mile day. There was no way that I was going to be able to swing out and do this. And so I mean, it was a good 10, 15 minutes. I'm sitting there going, I cannot do this. There is no way that I can actually go and ride through this tunnel. And so I'm reading the sign, and the sign says different things about the tunnel, and it's an ecological blah, 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 blah. And okay, I'm just thinking, I don't want to go in this tunnel. And there are some rules. One of the rules is you had to walk your bike through the tunnel. They didn't want you riding because they didn't want you crashing into anybody else. Now, I don't know how many of you seen seen cyclists walk into a coffee shop. We have the cleated shoes, and we're kind of walking, trying not to slip. And so the idea of walking a mile through this hole of death in cycling shoes, it's just not appealing to me. So I read a little further. It says, wintertime, you're welcome to go in the tunnel. Just close the doors behind you. So why in the hell would you go into this tunnel? And then what do? Do you just walk until you hit the other side? Like, how does this work? So I finally realized there's no option. You have to. So I'm reading along, and it says, please keep volume levels at a minimum so as not to disturb the bats. And I'm thinking, this is the worst day of my life. And I had many experiences the last couple years in this whole journey that I've been on, wondering, what the hell am I doing? But this was definitely like, seriously, what are you doing out here? And so I finally mustered up the courage. I got off my bike. I started walking. So I'm walking into the tunnel, and I'm freaking out. I mean, I know my heart rate. I'm walking, and my heart rate was spiked. And so I'm walking along, and sure enough, my shoes are crunching on the gravel, and the gravel noises, echoing down the tunnel. And I'm visioning Batman, the scene from Batman when all the bats come out, and I'm thinking, this is not good. So I walk along. So I don't know, 50 feet into the tunnel, I'm thinking, no, I'm riding this tunnel. I'll go to jail. I'll go to ticket. At least I won't have to be in this tunnel. If I get in trouble for this, I'm riding, if I get a ticket, I don't care, I'm riding through this tunnel. There's no way that I will make it alive to the other end of this tunnel without just keeling over from panic attack. So I get on my bike, I start soft pedaling. I soft pedal in, I finally turn on my lights, completely worthless. I mean, these lights, I could see the top of my tire and a little bit of the ground. If I turned it into the tunnel, it just disappeared again. So I can see a dot at the end of the tunnel, and you can actually see it. That's all I see is a dot at the end of the tunnel and a front tire. And so I start pedaling. I'm freaking out a little bit. I'm pedaling along. I get about halfway through, and it's dripping water underneath. So I can feel water going down the back of my neck, down my arm, because once you get underground, sometimes the walls are weeping. I can't see anything at this point. So I'm just focused on look down at the tire, look up at the tunnel. Look down at the tire, look up at the tunnel. Look down at the tire, you're almost out of the tunnel. Okay. And I didn't notice that there was something else going on in the tunnel, and I kid you not, this close, an old lady walks past me in the tunnel. Oh. So she didn't have a headlight, which is why I didn't see her. She had a tail light, but my eyes were all wigged out, so I didn't see her. I saw her, and I can still see her now. When she was that close to my face. Now, a couple things happened. First of all, I screamed. Most definitely. I probably peed a little, to be honest. I had to be really honest. And it was one of those moments where I thought, what in the hell are you doing out here? Seriously, you're supposed to be this branding person that is in a room somewhere pitching a brand. That's what you did for your career. And now you're on a bicycle and your family is who knows where, and what are you doing? And so I want to tell the story today a little bit about how my career had this crazy shift and how this kind of chubby branding guy ended up riding a bike across the country. And so I wanted to give you a few pieces of the backstory, and really where it started for me was with hot dogs. And I was going through some personal change. This was probably 5 or 6 years ago, actually closer to 7 years ago, going through some personal change, wasn't happy with the career that I was in. I've been self-employed my whole life and kind of was looking to make some changes. And so we had decided to go to lunch. So we go to lunch, and I'm definitely not feeling like I'm supposed to be doing what I'm doing in life. And these are big picture things, I had having some health problems and just some different things going on. So we went and had hot dogs. We go to this hot dog stand, and I'm standing there, and the guy's all antsy to take our order, and I'm thinking, wow, this is different. This guy's excited about hot dogs. And so I guess I'll have a Chicago dog, and he whips up the Chicago dog, and he flips around this little piece of paper, and he packages it, and he slides it across the counter, and he goes, oh! And I stop. I have never in my life dropped something off at a client with. That's good work right there. I've never delivered something on that level. And you meet people sometimes that their job is completely unrelated to you, but you walk away and go, I am a complete hack at what I do. And this was one of those moments. And so here was this moment where I thought, there's never been anything I was excited about. I'm just kind of going through the motions, and I'm not really living out the brand. Now, I had spent my career helping companies kind of bridge what I call the branding trust gap. And so this gap, this is a concept that I kind of use on a regular basis. I think a lot of organizations have this gap that forms between them and their audience. And the larger the gap, the harder it is to gain trust, to do business with a person, or for someone to trust an individual or whatever it is. So example of this is working with a consulting firm, amazing consulting firm that does construction stuff, big projects. An incredible company. You talk to their best clients, they love them. But then you look at their marketing, and you look at their messaging, and you look at everything, it's very blah. And so there's a gap there. So there's this amazing company that if they just tell their story better, the gap would close and they would be able to close more business. And those are the best ones for me, is the company was amazing. They just weren't doing a good job telling the story. It also goes the other way. Clients that talk a lot about what they do and how great they are, but then when you talk to the clients, you find out they're not so great at it. We have one recently that I was working on where they're big on integrity, and they keep using this word, and they keep using this word. So I do some research, and we interview some vendors and some clients, and descriptive words like they're really shady, they don't follow through, some of these things. And I said, there's the gap. There's the gap of you talk about who you are, but you're not really that. If I had to be honest with myself, there was a gap there for me because I knew that I had things that I could offer that I wasn't doing. And branding is much more than a set of visuals. It's a whole experience. And people that experience me, they hear about some of my aspirations in life and they would go, why isn't this guy doing this? He has the ability to do it. Why isn't he doing it? I think some companies misunderstand branding. I think some maybe aren't willing to make the changes to the branding that it takes, whether to the organization or how they convey their message. But I also think some get it, but I think the ones that are the next level above getting it is living it. And that branding becomes truly just an extension of who they really are. And those are the ones that I love to work with, both in individuals and companies. I personally knew that I had more to offer. I knew that there were things that I needed to be involved in. I was also dealing with some serious weight issues at the time. So this is me 6 years ago. I was over 300 pounds. As you can see, I look really happy. I've got my beverage and my snacks. Now, I think there are many reasons why we as people don't live the brand. And I want to kind of now weave my story of how I ended up in the stupid bat tunnel with kind of 4 things of why I don't think we live the brand. And the first is that we're distracted. I think a lot of people, individuals and companies are distracted. And what I mean by that is we're distracted by the complexity of life. And so we never really understand who we truly are because we've just made life so complex. We're distracted by the pace of life. It could be email, social media. I mean, my gosh, the Apple Watch. I have a pet peeve with the Apple Watch, not to diss on anybody with the Apple Watch, but when I have lunch with somebody with one, I don't like when you're sitting here like this the whole time. Like, we're having a conversation, let's have a conversation. But we've created this space where this pace of life is just crazy. It's no wonder that so many people have ADD now because we've created a space for it. We're distracted by our past failures. There's certain things that have happened, and so because of that, we're not willing to maybe take that risk like we used to. I think many times we're trying to be something maybe that we're not. I think this is true of a lot of companies that I've worked with, that they're more focused on the competition than they are about how do we make an effective brand or an effective product for the clients that we're trying to serve. Forget the competition, leave them behind, serve the clients. Or we just become really good at numbing ourselves. You know, there's tough times in life. It's easier just to veg out and watch Netflix than it is to talk to my wife about maybe an issue that we have. So we're distracted. There's constant distraction. And I think that it's so much easier to kind of just numb ourselves and be in that distracted moment than it is to take change or to affect change. Now, after the doctor had shared some concerns with me, I took up cycling. I had a friend that was a rider. He got me on a bike, and the doctor had told me, like, you're not going to see your grandkids or your kids grow up if you don't. I was 342 pounds, I think, at my heaviest. My resting heart rate was 85, resting. And so I got on a bike, and I don't know what happened, but something clicked for me. I wish I had found it earlier. I wish I had found it in my teenage years, and maybe I wouldn't have had to go through what I went through, but that's part of my story, and I'm proud of that part of my story, even though it's been difficult. Now, I had no idea at the time how much cycling was going to affect me. I had no idea that it was more than just being in shape, but it was actually giving me a place to think and reflect. At times, it removed me from that distraction. It gave me a space where my phone wasn't ringing. This is taken actually up near here, going up Mount Baldy Road. And to go up there on a Thursday in the morning when nobody's up there is just a place where I've created space. Nobody has that space anymore because the expectation is, when I got in the industry, I'm not that old, but when I got in the industry, we always had FedEx. I had at least till 5 o'clock to make FedEx with something. Now I have 5 minutes because it's email, and so we've compacted time to the point where there's no space to think, am I really happy right now? Am I really excited about where my life is? Do I really feel like I'm making a difference in this organization or with these people? There's no time for that because we're too distracted. So around the same time, some friends of mine, and this is starting to weave into a story now, so some friends of mine were starting an organization called Man and Nutrition. And the purpose of this product is to fight an issue called severe acute malnutrition. And it's an issue where this is beyond hunger, this is starvation. So this is toddler age kids that even if you give them food, they don't get better. They need a therapeutic food treatment because they've hit a point of hunger and starvation where they literally are starving to death. And to give you an idea, severe acute malnutrition, or SAM as we call it, is the first 1,000 days of life. It affects 20 million children in rural poor areas, primarily Africa, a lot of India, South America, parts of Asia. 20 million children at any given time, 2.5 million deaths. per year. And the kids that don't die, they are malnourished during the most important time of life, which is when they're learning how to walk, their brains are developing. So even if they don't become fatal because of what they have, they are certainly affected by it. Their families are affected by it. So now you have a kid that can't even walk, let alone go to school, and that cycle of poverty never ends. So some friends of mine were starting this amazing organization. They asked me to get involved, and these packets work. This is day 0, day 21. Wow. You can see the difference of just giving this kid peanut butter, absolutely amazing. The effective rate is over 90%, so 90% of kids, or over 90% of kids that go on a packet, they basically don't have to go on it after the treatment because they can go on regular food. The impact of this long term is huge. And so these guys asked me to get involved, but I just wasn't sure. I couldn't make it work. How do I afford the time? You know, I'm running a business, blah, blah, blah. And then I saw my son tasting a packet. And we had some samples. He wanted to taste what it tastes like. This is my oldest son when he was younger. And I realized there's the only difference between Andrew, my son, and Marvin, which is the child here on the right, is privilege. Andrew was born here. He was born into a family that can take care of him. He was born into a place where we don't have severe acute malnutrition in the U.S. We have hunger. We don't have childhood starvation because ultimately there is programs and things that can keep that from happening. But yet my son was born here, and because of that, he inherited privilege. And that turned into this internal dialogue where I realized I have privilege. I have abilities and things that God has gifted me with that I could give to the world. And who am I to say that isn't just for me, that's for the world. And so it became this internal dialogue as I rode my bike, and I realized I have to get involved on some level. And so I got involved, and this becomes my second observation about living the brand, is people that truly live it, they understand how privileged they are. There's this internal drive that they say that I have to do this. There's something about it that I have to do, and it's because I think they grasp how privileged they are with the opportunities that are in front of them. They are willing to live it because they have great passion for what they do. They show up knowing that the job needs them, not that they need the job. And so understanding privilege means you know it isn't just about you. You have something that the world needs. And so I got involved. I had no idea what it would look like at the time. I kind of initially took them on as a client. Eventually I had a benefactor come in and pay some bills so that I could work on it more. And I just started working with them as a client. I helped them establish some things. But again, I had no idea where it would ever go. I can honestly say this is the most important product I've ever worked on, most important project I've ever worked on. And so eventually, it's a long story, but I co-founded a group called Stop Sam, which kind of brings us towards the bike ride. So I co-founded a group with this guy, Mike. He's another dad, another business guy in Atlanta, great guy. Wanted to kind of see change. And the idea was that we wanted to leverage our creativity and the things we knew how to do to tell the story and raise money to buy these packets. If I could just get more peanut butter to these kids, maybe more of them would live, and maybe it would provide hope. And I just wanted to tell the story because that's what I do. I tell stories. That's what I did for branding for almost 20 years. So we did things like this campaign called PBJ for Good. It started in California with 16 top restaurants. The chefs put their take of a peanut butter and jelly sandwich on the menu. Last year we had over 50 restaurants in Atlanta. This year we're going for 75 in Atlanta. The goal is now to eventually spread it regional. So if you know any restaurateurs, I'd love to meet them. So this is another, just using creativity is what I want to do. I have a list of a million ideas. So where did cycling come in the mix? I think as a cyclist, and if there's any cyclists in the room, they can attest to this, there's always this dream of riding across the country. And for 3 years I had this idea and I just kept going, no way, there's no way I can do that. That is insane. You either do it in your 20s when you're not, supporting a wife and kids, or you do it when you're older, when you're not supporting a wife and kids as much, when your kids have hopefully moved on and you're just paying off college debt. So I would try to kill it and it would come back. I would try to kill it and it would come back. And for whatever reason, it just wouldn't go away. And so July 2013, I started sketching out idea, and this is kind of how my head works. These are kind of taken out of my sketchbook. I started sketching out this timeline and I thought, this is insane. Like, there is no way that I can do this. And I was struggling because this isn't what I was supposed to do. This was totally against what we normally do in driving a career. I was getting ready to do this crazy thing. And I was fighting, which to me is another reason people don't live the brand, which is the internal critic. And this ultimately was the biggest one for me. And I think the critic's voice, or the critic has many voices, says things like, you might fail if you try, you can't do this. Or as a company, we say, well, we've never done it like that before. My own personal critic is I should have been doing this, I should be doing this. I have a friend that tells me all the time to stop shooting on myself. At its best, I think the critic maybe helps give us a different perspective, but I think most of us, at its worst, it paralyzes us. And I think the critic was telling me, you can't do this. And so there were all the reasons of, you know, what does it do to your career? You have a wife and kids to support. And so finally I said, well, that's it, wife and kids. I'll just tell my wife. This is easy. I'll tell my wife, I want to ride a bike across America. She'll say, no, we're not doing that, because we're not going to give up all that. And so we went out on a date, and I said, hey, I want to raise money for the cause, and you know, I like speaking, and it'd be fun to go across country, and maybe you and the kids could take kids out of school, blah, 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 blah. My wife goes, oh my gosh, that's amazing, we have to do that. So my head exploded, because that was not part of the plan. I was supposed to be out. So I thought, this can't happen. So then I started looking for people to talk me out of it. So I went to a mentor, and I thought, he will talk me out of it, because this is a terrible career decision. I'm thinking about doing this thing, blah, blah, blah. He's like, here's $5,000, let's start fundraising. I'm like, shit, this is not how it's supposed to work. A friend of mine tells me, your wife wants to go on an adventure, you go on the adventure, because there are so many guys that have tried to open that door with their wives. He said, don't do it for you, do it for all of us, you have to go. And so I kept asking the question, what happens to me, what happens in my career? But I think a bigger question that we should start asking, and it's an uncomfortable question, is what happens to others when we don't make those decisions? What happens to our coworkers when we don't stand up for something that's right? What happens to the company overall if we don't make these tough decisions? And so I kind of hit this place where I said, you know what happens to these kids if I don't go? I might be the only one that provides that one kid with a packet of peanut butter to save his life. And so the momentum began to build. So I dove in head first. I gave up my office, I gave up my clients, I closed the business. This is a cool spot that I had in Old Town Orange for 14 years. Really sad to see it go, but there was just this drive towards something. We figured out storage, we figured out all kinds of stuff. I had sponsors that came on board, all kinds of different sponsors. Someone gave me an $8,000 bike to build, or that built me an $8,000 bike to ride. We had a company somebody give us an RV that we then wrapped. I had done some speaking for them. So like, well, if you design some graphics, we'll put graphics on. I'm like, okay. And it was literally every week, like, well, if you do this, we'll help you with this, or we'll. And the support was amazing. My wife learned how to drive, which is absolutely terrifying. I learned that for up to a 45-foot motorhome, you do not need a special driver's license. So the next time you're driving down the freeway and you see an old retired gentleman driving a 45, know that that gentleman did not go through any special training to drive. You'll find yourself moving over a couple of lanes. So my wife ended up having 2 hours of driving lessons, and then we left on a trip. So we started planning the route, and I put together a planning team. Again, this is the things that I knew how to do from business, but I was applying them now to this crazy thing. A month before we left, one of the things that was really, really important to me before we leave is that all the expenses of the trip were somehow covered, whether it be gift in kind or financially, because I didn't want to raise money for what we were doing once we were on the road. I wanted to raise money for the cause. And so we were off. I had raised quite a bit of money, but we were still off of what I thought it would cost to do it right, hire a PR person, pay for the expenses, that sort of thing. And my last planning team meeting, which was about 45 days from when I left, I thought I might have to pull the pin on this. I mean, we had done an Indiegogo campaign that was done well. I had done events. I mean, it was, at this point, there was no turning back, but I was also at a place where I thought, this can't happen. That same friend that had paid a little bit of money every month to keep me involved in the cause came to the last planning team meeting, hands me a check for $30,000 and says, go ride your bike, which is humbling to say the least. I mean, to have people, and that's what happened, this passion that I had for it, people were rallying. I've never in my career seen anything about it. When we start living the brand, that passion attracts the right people, which is absolutely amazing. Within 5 months, we had raised over $100,000 in cash and sponsorships and gear. It was absolutely amazing. Everything that we needed was provided for. So on June 20th of last year, I started my bike ride in San Diego. I got down there with a couple of friends. This is the kind of before picture with my wife and kids. And I just started. I had kind of a rough idea of what the route was going to be. I had a plan of what I was going to do. This was very out of character for me. Everything I do is very strategic. It's planned out to a T. I've written, 5-year marketing plans of what I do. This was not that. This was just get on your bike and start pedaling, and we'll figure it out as we went along. Out of Orange County, we had a massive send-off event from my coffee sponsor. I had actually secured a company called Portola Coffee that actually mailed me fresh beans as we went across the street or across the trip, and so I always had this amazing coffee. So we had this huge launch out of Orange County. It was absolutely amazing. We had over 100 riders going up PCH with me. Again, I didn't know what to think of all this because I wasn't used to this sort of backing or people behind me. And then when we got to LA, again, a pack of riders picked me up out of LA, out of Santa Monica, very close to where Cross Campus is in Santa Monica. The bike shop had sponsored me there. And honestly, I was like Forrest Gump. I realized, like, this is like the Forrest Gump story. This is like my life has become a movie. So I don't know how I chose the route that I did, but I kind of chose a fairly indirect route to get to New York. I knew I wanted to ride the northern part of the U.S., but I didn't want to start up in Portland where I didn't know anyone. I thought, well, I'll start down here. Not really thinking, you know, it's 1,200 miles to Portland riding. So I had already ridden 1,200 miles by the time I got to Portland, which beats your body up pretty bad, actually surprisingly bad. In fact, the day I left San Diego, somebody had told, the two riders I was with told a guy there, said, hey, this guy's riding across the country. He said, why is he going this way? Well, he's riding to Portland first. And the guy says, he's not going to make it. He's totally going to fail. This is day one. I'm thinking, who are you? I don't even know. Have you done it and failed? I don't understand. Like, what? Even if you believe that, why would you say that? I met some absolutely amazing people along the way, rode with a lot of people, but eventually it got pretty isolated, and then it got really lonely. I remember my parents came and visited us in Boise, and I left Boise alone with my mom crying in the parking lot because we were leaving again, which is pretty tough. And so it became pretty grueling as we went there. And so I want to kind of end with a story. I have a ton of stories from the road. I could spend too much time. How are we doing on time, by the way? My timer is off, so.
About 5-10 minutes.
Okay. So like I said, have lots of stories from the road, but I want to kind of share with one. It was late August when we hit South Dakota, and we had talked in the planning team meetings that at some point I was going to hit a wall. And I think they expected me to hit a wall like in San Francisco or something, you know, and it took me a while to hit that wall. I am not athletic. I know my demeanor would say otherwise, or my body shape would say otherwise, but I am not athletic, but I have a lot of heart, and I can suffer. And that is my one thing on the bike that I mean, I'm athletic in that I can ride quite a bit, but I can outsuffer anybody. It's actually sad that I don't have the physical talent to be a cyclist, because I would probably be racing because I do have that drive, and that's what was getting me. But we knew at some point that I would hit that wall, and it happened in South Dakota. I actually is one of the places on the trip that I hope to never return to on a bicycle is in South Dakota. It had been less than 3 months. I'd ridden over 3,000 miles at this point. I had just taken 5 days off the bike, completely unplanned. My body was saying, okay, yeah, no, you're done, like you're done. And the campaign wasn't going well. It was a lonely place. We were tired of being on the road. I hit a really, really dark spot personally, a spot that I never thought was possible for me. And I'd finally gotten back on the bike in the Badlands. And the Badlands this time of year, one of the things that we were concerned about is the heat, because this is summer now. And the Badlands were supposed to be warm, and instead it was 55 and raining. I got diverted on this like dirt and gravel road. I walked my way through mud. I couldn't even clip in my shoes at some point because the shoes were so muddy. I mean, it was just a mess. And so I had 3 days in South Dakota. It was the 3 worst days I've ever spent on the bike by far, for a number of reasons. First was the conditions. I had day one, 6 hours, 30 mile per hour headwinds, where you're just down in the drops, just getting crushed, pushing as hard as you can to go 7 miles per hour. Getting lost, ending up at lunch where it's like 1:30, 2 o'clock in the afternoon, you're having lunch, looking down, realizing you still have 80 miles to ride. I mean, just brutal. And I'm by myself, lonely, and day 2 was headwinds again. 80 miles took me over 10 hours. I mean, just brutal. And the third day, I hit wind in the morning, and then the lightning and the hail started, and I couldn't get to the highway to get picked up. I was on this backside road. The only roads that went across were dirt. I didn't want to get stuck. And so at one point, the lightning was literally simultaneous with the thunder, and I didn't know what to do. I didn't know if I needed to lay down or if I needed to keep riding, and so I just kept riding. I was spitting water and gravel out of my mouth. The journal entry from that day said, "Today was not a day for photos or pleasantries, nor a time for me to look up and admire the view. It was a day to get low and try to minimize the damage of the wind. A day of butchering my legs and smashing pedals, doing my best to keep a reasonable pace. A day to be cold and wet from soupy fog. A day where even I would be short on things to say. Rides like today make you feel less human and more machine, fighting the internal battle to stop pedaling, yelling at your legs to simply shut up. Even food and water become just more fuel for the machine. Today was not about sightseeing, but about doing my job, out here riding, suffering in hopes that malnourished kids might suffer less. breaking my body for someone else. Head down, gritted teeth, riding hard for those that need me here. Today I am hating this. Today I am crushed. And I got back to the RV and I quit. I told my wife, I said, this is stupid. I said, I'm out here risking my life. The campaign's not going well. You don't want to be out anymore. Her and I were not agreeing on certain things. We were having a disagreement. And so I quit. I was done. I told her, this is stupid. My kids started crying because they weren't going to be able to see the Statue of Liberty. And one of my close friends chimed in around the same time and had some really critical comments about what we were doing and how the campaign was going, and basically saying that I wasn't doing my job. And I mean, it was brutal. And I remember at one point thinking, as a truck passed me, like, if that truck hits me, at least this will be over. At least I don't have to deal with this. I mean, it was dark. It was to the point where I had never thought I was even capable of thinking that dark. And I didn't want to be on the road anymore. You know, and I talk a lot about riding alone, but the truth was I was spending 8 hours a day with the critic. And I think that happens to a lot of us when we get too isolated, is we spend too much time with the critic. And I had bought in to the fact that this doesn't matter. This doesn't matter, which is the thing that I talk about, living the brand. We don't live the brand because we are convinced that what we're doing doesn't matter. And we can't accept that maybe things will get uncomfortable, because that's a sign that, well, then I guess it doesn't matter. It's too easy to give up. You know, everybody talks about if you find your passion, you'll never work a day in your life. Let me tell you, if you find your passion, you're going to work your ass off. And you're going to sacrifice everything. And it's going to hurt, because I did that last year, and it hurt. I became so overwhelmed by what wasn't working that I was completely missing the privilege of being out on the road with my family and riding a bike. It was so overwhelming. The critic had taken over. We don't see the effects sometimes that that has on our actions in the world, that if we don't think it matters, then where is the creativity? Where is that? The critic wins and we simply give up. So a couple of days had gone by, and I was sitting there going, I quit. I set up the maps. I'm figuring out how to come home. I had to run up to a bike shop. We didn't have a car, so I thought, okay, I'll ride up to my bike. I gotta ride my bike up and take care of something at this bike shop. And my son asked, can I go with you? My older son, who's the taller one, obviously. So my older one, I couldn't take the younger one because he's just too squirrely. I don't trust him on a bike. So the older one wants to go with, and I said, okay, yeah, you can go with. So I watched him take his little bike bag for his bike, and he puts a multi-tool in, and he puts a Cliff Bar in, and he puts a couple things, and then he puts some stickers and some cards that we had made for the trip. And I said, what are you doing? He goes, Daddy, we might run into someone that wants to make a donation or wants to support the trip. I got to be able to tell them the story. And it floored me. Because I was so focused on this big audience of what I was trying to reach that I was missing the most important audience, which was this audience of two. And my son taught me something that day of, sometimes we make things so complex that we miss what we're really supposed to be doing because it doesn't feel important enough. We don't think it matters. Living the brand means we know that it matters and that it does matter. At a minimum, we've created the space to find out what matters. And so it absolutely rocked me. I was crying. It was because I realized at his purest point, he just wants to help kids. You know, like he doesn't think about, oh, we didn't get this press release, we didn't get this done, blah, 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 blah. He's not thinking about anything. He's just like, hey, there might be somebody that will make a donation. And that might be one more kid that lives because of this. And so I got on, at its purest form, that was what the trip was about. It was about me showing my kids what it meant to help others. It was because my wife wanted to go on an adventure. It was because I had been given talents that could be used for something. And it was because I couldn't imagine a parent, like being a parent, watching your child just starve to death. And so after that, I crushed it. I absolutely crushed it. I got back on the bike. This is probably one of the most epic moments of my life, crossing the George Washington Bridge into Manhattan. It was 4,170 miles to get there, 59 days of riding. I climbed 170,000 vertical feet. Just on the bike, I burned over 140,000 calories. I could not keep up on the food. It was pretty disgusting how I was eating. My longest day was in Wyoming at a 136-mile day. South Dakota was definitely the hardest day. And I survived so many discomforts, but that moment with my son, honestly for me, it changed my life to the point where I feel like the whole trip was for that moment. And I got some really sweet tan lines. So the last day I rode 56 miles into New York. This was my family greeting me. To date, we've donated over 140,000 packets to South Sudan. I actually have an opportunity that I in Wisconsin that I spoke at a high school. I spoke to 8 kids at a high school, not thinking anything of it. That's probably going to lead to a $60,000 donation from one of the parents that was in that meeting. Again, we don't think it matters, but it matters. And I can tell you, I ended in New York that day, and I was able to say, you know what? You did a good job today. You did a really good job. So I think the biggest reason that many of us don't live the brand in review is that we don't know how to face that critic. We don't know how to deal with that internal voice of saying we shouldn't do it. And we think that once we find the right thing, that voice is not going to exist. But the truth is that voice is always going to exist. It's moving forward despite that. In my case, the biggest critic was internal, and I had to engage the critic. I think the hardest part of the trip for me was that loneliness and spending time. So I want to end with a quote from Theodore Roosevelt. And he said, "It is not the critic who counts. It is not the man who points out how the strong man stumbles, or where the doer of deeds could have done them better. The credit belongs to the man who is actually in the arena, whose face is marred by dust and sweat and blood, who strives valiantly, who errs, who comes short again and again, because there is no effort without error and shortcoming, but who does actually strive to do the deeds, who knows great enthusiasms, the great devotion, who spends himself in a worthy cause, who at best, in the end, knows the triumph and high achievement, and who at the worst he fails. But at least he fails while daring greatly, so that his place shall never be with those cold and timid souls who neither know victory nor defeat. Living the brand means that we move beyond distraction with purpose because we know how privileged we are. And we confront the critic because we know how important the work that we do, how much it matters, even if it only matters for an audience of a couple people. So thank you for letting me share. I think we have some time for Q&A.
Yes.
That was amazing. Really, really inspirational. Sorry, I don't mean to trip you there.
And I don't have a voice left, so.
I don't know about you guys, but I was definitely touched by that story. And I can definitely relate. I think we all can to that critic mentality. We all have our own demons that we're battling internally, in addition to the external stuff in the world. But I think that critic is like probably the most pervasive piece. And as a coach, I understand that it's just doing it anyway, regardless. And there's some process that will work better for you than others, and just discovering that and forging ahead. We're going to open up to Q&A. We're a little short on time, so let's limit it to 4 questions, comments offline, and then we'll just take it from where we have some announcements after that.
All right, who would like to ask?
Sorry I ran long.
Great story.
That was actually very inspirational. I was thinking about going home and riding my bike.
Good.
Who would like to ask the first question?
Love the story. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
My name is Eric. I'm a mobile app developer.
Okay.
The thing with brand is you have a very exciting product and a very exciting story behind the product. But for services, that's kind of vanilla, like just programming or marketing. How do you create a really cool story or brand behind it, though?
So I think there's a couple things. I think one is finding a way. So whenever I would interview a client, so I'll approach this as a client if I was coaching a client. I would interview the client and I would ask questions of the decision makers, the C-level people, of why they got into what they do. Because I was always looking for that spark. I was always looking for the reason why they were doing it. And sometimes they lose sight of that. So maybe they got into the business that they were in because they really wanted to service people better. Or there's always some reason that's more than just the mechanics of delivering a product. But there's always a reason that they got into the business they were in. And I'm always trying to find that because that's where the authentic story is. The other thing I would say is, as a business, the more that you can niche into a certain market, especially if it's a market that you're excited about, the easier it is to be excited about what you're selling because you're excited to serve that market. So an example of that is I never really had a niche in the companies that I work with. I was in business for 20 years. Never had a niche in who I was working with, but I always, as far as the type of industry I am, but I was always looking for a type of person. I was always looking for, would this person be a good leader? Would I follow this person? And I knew, for me, that I could get excited about whatever they were doing, even if it was the most mundane thing, because I believed in that person. And that's where I did it selfishly, because if I believed in that person, my creativity would show up. If I didn't believe in what they were doing or who they were, my creativity would not exist. So I would say if you can find avenues and things that you're excited about that run parallel with what you do as a business, I think that's part of it. And then I think finding places where you can niche in, where you might say, you know, I don't really have a niche, but I'm looking for this type of person. Because I think that is what ultimately people connect with, is authentic stories. Simon Sinek says they buy why you do it, not what you do. And so the why is you truly understand why you do it. You know, you do it because I really like helping this type of person because they share the same values as me, or I really like helping these type of companies because I'm excited about that industry. And the thing I will say too is you can do 60–70% of that kind of work, and then you can do stuff that you're maybe not as excited about it, but you can get excited about that mundane work because it enables you to do the other work. So, you know, in a perfect world, we'd all be working in exactly the industry and the job that we want. That doesn't exist. But I think that if you know why you're doing some of that mundane work, if that's a bigger reason, you know, it might even be that I can do this work because I'm excited to go hang out with my kids, you know.
Does anybody else have a question?
Thank you very much for the presentation. The story was incredible. Wondering, where's your next trip? You going to Europe or what?
My next trip. I don't think my wife would say yes again right now. I think I need to work a little bit. I am going to probably go to Africa next year on a trip related to the cause. I have a friend that just rode from mountain bike from Cape Town to or Cairo to Cape Town. I would probably get the no on that one, but I'd like to do that one. Short of that, I've set a goal. I'll be 40 next year, so I've set a goal by 50 to do the Continental Divide Trail, which is a mountain bike trail that goes from Canada to Mexico. And so I'd love to do that. But short of that, I mean, right now I'm just kind of riding around town. So riding around town for me is about 200 miles a week. So, and I still need to drop some weight. I mean, I lost a lot of weight, but I still got a ways to go.
Thank you for your story. It was terrific. Can you talk a little bit about how you push away those distractions? You know, being alone and solitary, it's difficult to push those away. So can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. So short of riding a bike across the country, which is a great way to push away all distractions, but that might be too much time alone. I learned that that was the toughest part. In my business and in kind of the last, let's say, 5 to 6 years, I've really kind of discovered, I've created kind of a ritual of, it doesn't matter how busy I am, I always spend an hour in the morning with coffee, and I'll read or I'll write or I'll do something, and I create space for it. It doesn't matter how big. It's like the most important client meeting that I have. And so we have to just say, you know what, no, I'm going to do this. This is important. Once a month, I will take usually a day or a half a day, and I'll go somewhere remote, and I'll kind of review things, and again, I'll create space for that. Getting rid of distractions. I get home, I take my keys, my phone, everything, I throw it in the bedroom. I want to sit down and play with my kids. I don't need to be on my phone. I'm actually getting closer and closer to just getting off of a lot of social media because of that. I might just do Instagram only. You know, Facebook is all just become political rants anyway, so I think I might just, and so you have to purposely create space for it. And then I will usually, at some point in the year, I'll take a couple of days somewhere and I'll go and I'll plan. And so cycling for me has been a great way to do it because I'm away from distractions when I go out and ride, and I have to pay attention to riding. You know, the gym is okay, but you have TV, you have people, you have other things. I think there has to be that time when you get away, even if it's once or twice a week. And then little things, like if I'm feeling stressed, I'll get up and go for a walk around the block. Leave my phone. I leave my phone at the office when I go to lunch. I don't need to be on my phone. I'm having lunch with someone, you know. I think it's just being deliberate about it, I guess, is the ultimate answer. And, you know, it's hard because the demands of the world are on us about it. But honestly, I think when you start doing that, you start to see the benefits of it, and then you don't turn back.
One last question.
Yes.
Can you give any advice on sort of translating some of these lessons that you learned to teams? So, you know, if you're a manager or a leader in an organization, and translating some of this to get the team kind of on board with these sorts of concepts.
I think the first thing I would say is be the one that goes first. I can tell my kids all day what it means to go help someone else, or I can just go show them. And so as a leader, if you decide that something's important to you and the team, Simon Sinek said, a leader is not somebody who calls themselves a leader. A leader is someone who leads. And so I think, I've always said the leader should go first. You know, I don't want to get political, but I always said, like, if you want to stop wars, the leaders go first. If you want to start a war, let's go back to the night days when you were the king on the horse would draw the first sword. You wouldn't have as many things going on in the world because the leader has to go first. I think the best leaders don't even want to be called leaders because they know, bless you, they know what, they know what the sacrifice is for that. And so I would say that's the first thing. I think the other thing is learning the strengths of the team and learning what's important to them and just being authentic. So I don't know if that answers your question, but.
It will have to. We have to wrap up the Q&A.
And I'll be around for a little bit if anybody has questions after. So.
Absolutely great questions. And again, it's my favorite. Amazing story, and a really good cause. Real quick, photobomb and then announcements.
Photobomb?
Well, I mean, photobomb people in the back, of course. So. But,
right here?
Yeah.
Do I just stand or do I give like one of these?
Yeah.
Anything you want.